July 29th, 1997. Queen Elizabeth sat in her private study at Balmoral Castle, staring at the telephone. It was 11:47 p.m, far too late to make a call by any standard of royal protocol. But the Queen had been unable to sleep, haunted by something she'd read earlier that day. A newspaper interview in which Diana had spoken about feeling abandoned by the royal family. The words had cut deeper than Elizabeth wanted to admit, because they were true. For 16 years, she had watched Diana struggle, suffer and slowly break, and she had done nothing. Tonight, that silence felt unbearable. Elizabeth picked up the phone and dialed a number she'd never called before, Diana's private line at Kensington Palace. What the Queen said in the next 23 minutes would be the most honest conversation she'd ever had with her former daughter-in-law. But it would also be too late. Just 10 days later, Diana would be dead. The phone rang 3 times before Diana answered. Her voice was cautious, uncertain. "Hello? Diana, it's Elizabeth." There was a long pause. Diana had never received a personal call from the Queen in all her years in the royal family. All communication had gone through intermediaries, secretaries, carefully worded letters on official stationery. A direct phone call at midnight was unprecedented. "Your Majesty," Diana said, her voice careful. "Is everything all right? Are the boys—" "William and Harry are fine," Elizabeth interrupted. "This isn't about them. It's about you and me. We need to talk." Diana sat down on her bed, her mind racing. The Queen calling her personally at nearly midnight, saying they needed to talk. This was either very good or very bad, and given their history, Diana suspected it wasn't good. "I'm listening," Diana said quietly. Elizabeth took a breath. What she was about to say violated every rule she'd lived by. Queens didn't admit mistakes. Queens didn't show vulnerability. Queens didn't apologise to divorced daughters-in-law. But Elizabeth was 71 years old and she was tired. Tired of duty without compassion. Tired of protocol that caused suffering. Tired of watching people suffer because she was too proud to bend. "I read your interview in Le Monde today," Elizabeth began. "The one where you talked about feeling cast out by the family, about being stripped of your title, your status, your place in our world." Diana's guard went up immediately. "Ma'am, if you're calling to criticise me for speaking to the press—" "I'm not," Elizabeth cut in. "I'm calling because you were right. Everything you said was right. And I need to tell you that before I lose my nerve." Diana was speechless. In 16 years, the Queen had never admitted she was right about anything. "You were cast out," Elizabeth continued, her voice steady but heavy with emotion. "You were stripped of dignity, protection and family support. You were treated as a problem to be managed rather than a person who needed help. And I allowed that to happen." "Ma'am, I don't understand," Diana said, her voice breaking slightly. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm running out of time to tell you," Elizabeth replied. "I'm 71 years old, Diana. I've spent my entire life putting duty before everything else, before happiness, before family, before basic human kindness. I thought that's what being Queen meant. But I was wrong." Diana felt tears forming. She'd waited 16 years to hear something like this, an acknowledgement, an apology, some recognition that she hadn't been crazy or difficult or wrong. "When you married Charles," Elizabeth continued, "you were 20 years old, a child really, and we threw you into this life with no preparation, no support, no guidance. We expected you to know how to be royal when none of us had bothered to teach you." "I tried," Diana whispered. "I tried so hard to do everything right." "I know you did. I saw you trying. But instead of helping you, we criticised you. When you struggled with the pressure, we called you weak. When you developed an eating disorder from stress, we called you dramatic. When you reached out for help, we told you to pull yourself together. We failed you at every turn." Diana was crying now, years of suppressed pain flowing out. "Do you know what it was like, Mum? To be so young, so lost, and to have no one. Charles didn't love me. The palace staff treated me like an inconvenience. You kept your distance. I was drowning and everyone just watched." "I know," Elizabeth said. and Diana could hear emotion in the Queen's normally composed voice. And that's what I'm calling to say. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't what you needed. I'm sorry I chose protocol over compassion. I'm sorry I let you suffer alone. The words hung in the air between them, an apology that should have come 16 years earlier but was finally being spoken. Why now? Diana asked through her tears. Why are you saying this now? Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. Because I'm afraid I won't have another chance. You're rebuilding your life, Diana. You're finding happiness. You're planning a future. And I realised that if something happened, if life took an unexpected turn, I would regret never saying these things to you. You're scaring me, Diana said. Is there something you know that I don't? No, nothing specific, just an old woman's sense that time is finite and words unsaid become regrets that haunt you forever. Diana wiped her eyes. I used to dream about this conversation, about you calling me, acknowledging what I went through, telling me I wasn't crazy. I gave up on that dream years ago. You weren't crazy, Elizabeth said firmly. You were a young woman thrust into an impossible situation with a husband who loved another woman, a family that didn't understand you, and an institution that saw you as a problem rather than a person. Anyone would have struggled. Most would have broken sooner than you did. The divorce nearly destroyed me, Diana admitted. Being stripped of my HRH title felt like being erased. Like 16 years of my life meant nothing. That was cruel, Elizabeth acknowledged. I argued against it, believe it or not, but I was overruled by advisors who thought removing your title would diminish your ability to compete with Charles for public affection. They were wrong. It just made you more sympathetic and us more heartless. You argued against it? Diana was surprised. I did. Not strongly enough, clearly, but I told them it was petty and vindictive. That you'd earned your place in this family by giving us William and Harry. That stripping your title made us look small. Elizabeth paused. But I let them overrule me. That's my failure. I could have put my foot down, and I didn't. Diana felt a strange mixture of vindication and sadness. The Queen had known the title stripping was wrong, but had allowed it anyway. It was a small acknowledgement, but meaningful nonetheless. Ma'am, can I ask you something I've always wondered? Anything. Did you ever like me? Even a little? Or was I always just the girl who wasn't good enough for your son? Elizabeth was quiet for a long moment. I liked you very much when you first arrived. You were sweet, genuine, and clearly devoted to Charles. I saw how the public loved you, and I thought you would be good for the monarchy. But then things became complicated. Charles was miserable. You were miserable and I didn't know how to fix it. So I retreated. I kept my distance because I didn't know how to help, and it seemed easier to let others manage the situation. That was cowardice on my part. And after the separation? After the separation, I was angry. Not at you specifically, but at the situation. The monarchy was being damaged by a very public marital collapse. The press was having a field day. Counsellors were telling me you were the problem, that you were unstable and seeking attention. I let myself believe them because it was easier than admitting we'd all failed you. I wasn't unstable, Diana said quietly. I was desperate. There's a difference. I know that now. I should have known it then. But I chose to believe the narrative that protected Charles and the institution rather than the truth that indicted us all. Diana took a shaky breath. Do you know what hurt the most? It wasn't Charles's affair or the failed marriage or even the divorce. It was feeling like I didn't matter, like my pain didn't count, like I could be discarded once I'd served my purpose of producing heirs. You mattered, Elizabeth said with quiet intensity. You mattered to William and Harry, who love you more than anything. You mattered to millions of people who saw themselves in you, and you should have mattered to me. I'm sorry you didn't feel that. They were both quiet for a moment, the weight of 16 years of misunderstanding hanging between them. Can I tell you something? Diana asked. Something I've never told anyone. Please. I used to practice conversations with you in my head. I'd imagine sitting down with you and explaining everything, how I felt, what I was going through, why I made certain choices. I'd practice until I had it perfect, and then I'd wait for a moment when you might actually listen, but that moment never came. I'm listening now, Elizabeth said softly. And so Diana talked. For the next 15 minutes, she poured out everything she'd held inside for years. The loneliness of the early marriage, the shock of discovering Charles's continued relationship with Camilla, the eating disorder that had been a cry for help no one had heard, the suicide attempts that had been dismissed as attention-seeking, the feeling of being watched, judged and found wanting every single day. She talked about the boys, how protecting them had been her only goal, how she'd tried to give them a normal childhood despite the abnormal circumstances, how she'd worried constantly about the impact of the divorce on them. She talked about her charity work, how it had saved her by giving her purpose beyond being Charles's failed wife, how she'd found meaning in helping others because she understood what it felt like to suffer. And she talked about her hopes for the future. She was finally free, finally able to build a life on her own terms. She was dating, travelling, considering new opportunities. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Elizabeth listened without interrupting, hearing things she'd never known or had deliberately chosen not to see. When Diana finally finished, exhausted from the emotional outpouring, Elizabeth spoke quietly. "Diana, I want you to know something. What I'm about to say, I've never said to anyone, and I'll likely never say again, but you deserve to hear it." "What is it?" "Charles should have never married you. Not because you weren't good enough, you were too good for him, but because he didn't love you. And you deserved someone who did. I knew he loved Camilla. I'd known for years. But I let the marriage proceed anyway, because it was expected, because it was duty, because that's what princes do. They marry suitable young women and produce heirs. I sacrificed your happiness on the altar of duty, and I'm deeply, profoundly sorry for that." Diana was crying again, but these were different tears. Tears of release, of finally being seen and understood. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for saying that." "You're going to be all right, Diana," Elizabeth said with certainty. "You're strong, you're kind, and you're finally free. You're going to build a beautiful life. I'm sure of it." They talked for a few more minutes, the conversation becoming lighter. Diana mentioned her upcoming vacation, her plans with the boys, her excitement about future possibilities. Elizabeth shared some thoughts on William and Harry, how proud she was of them, how well Diana had raised them. As the conversation drew to a close, Elizabeth said something unexpected. "Diana, would you consider having lunch with me when you return from your vacation? Just the two of us, no staff, no formality. I think we should have had many more conversations like this one." Diana was stunned. "I would like that very much, ma'am." "Good, call me when you're back. We'll arrange something." "I will, and Mum, thank you for calling, for apologising, for finally seeing me." "Thank you for answering," Elizabeth replied, "and for giving me the chance to say what I should have said 16 years ago." They said goodbye, and Elizabeth hung up the phone. She sat in her study for a long time afterward, feeling something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. The weight of unspoken truths, of suppressed guilt, had been lifted. She'd finally told Diana the truth, finally acknowledged her failures, finally offered the apology that was 16 years overdue. Elizabeth went to bed that night feeling lighter than she had in months. She would call Diana again when she returned from vacation. They would have that lunch. Perhaps they could build something resembling a friendship, or at least mutual respect. It wasn't too late to change the narrative, but it was too late. 10 days later, on August 31st, 1997, Elizabeth was woken at 1 a.m. by an urgent call. There had been an accident in Paris. Diana was dead. The Queen sat frozen, the phone still in her hand. Dead. Diana was dead. And suddenly, that midnight phone call became the last conversation they would ever have. The apology that had felt timely suddenly became terribly, tragically late. Elizabeth thought about Diana's excitement about her vacation, her plans for the future, her hope that things were finally getting better. She thought about the lunch they were supposed to have, the conversations they were supposed to continue, all gone, all impossible now. In the awful days that followed, as Britain mourned and the monarchy faced its greatest crisis, Elizabeth kept coming back to that phone call, to the things Diana had said, The pain she'd revealed, the hope she'd expressed, and the words Elizabeth had finally spoken. "I'm sorry, you mattered. You deserved better." She'd finally said those things, but 10 days hadn't been enough time for them to matter. 10 days hadn't been enough time to change anything. The apology had come, but it had come too late to heal the wounds or repair the relationship or give Diana the acknowledgement she deserved for 16 years. The Queen's private secretary, Robert Fellows, found her in her study at Balmoral the morning after Diana's death. She was still in her dressing gown, having not slept, and she was holding a notepad. "Ma'am, we need to discuss the arrangements," Robert began. "I called her," Elizabeth interrupted, not looking up. 10 days ago, at midnight. I called Diana and I apologised for everything, for all of it." Robert was stunned. This violated every protocol he knew. "Ma'am, you called her directly?" "I had to. I'd waited 16 years to tell her I was sorry, and now she's dead. And those 16 years of silence seem so stupid, so wasteful. What was I protecting by not speaking? What was more important than telling that girl she wasn't crazy, she wasn't wrong, she mattered?" "You couldn't have known," Robert said gently. "That's exactly the problem. We never know. We think we have time. We think we can address things later, when it's more convenient, when it fits better with protocol, and then time runs out and it's too late." Elizabeth looked up at Robert and he saw something he'd never seen before. The Queen was crying. She was going to have lunch with me when she got back from vacation. We were going to start over. She was excited about it. She said she'd call me, and now she'll never call. And I'll never get to have that lunch. And the last thing I'll ever know about Diana is that for 10 days she had hope that things might finally be different. The funeral arrangements proceeded. The public mourning intensified. The monarchy navigated its crisis. But Elizabeth carried the knowledge of that midnight phone call like a secret weight. She never told anyone the details of what she'd said to Diana or what Diana had said to her. It was private, sacred even. The last honest conversation between two women who should have had many more. Years later, those close to the Queen said she changed after Diana's death, became more willing to show emotion, more understanding of human frailty, more likely to extend compassion rather than judgment. Some attributed this to age, to the natural softening that comes with time. But those who knew about the midnight phone call understood. Elizabeth had learned the cost of waiting too long to say important things. She'd learned that protocol and pride weren't worth the regret of words left unspoken. She'd learned that sometimes the most royal thing you can do is simply be human. In 2006, nearly a decade after Diana's death, William asked his grandmother about Diana. They were at Balmoral in the same study where Elizabeth had made that midnight call. "Did you and Mum ever talk?" William asked. "I mean, really talk, not just official correspondence." Elizabeth looked at her grandson, so much like Diana in his emotional intelligence and compassion. "Once," she said quietly, 10 days before she died, I called her at midnight and I told her I was sorry for everything, for not protecting her, for not understanding her, for letting her suffer. I told her she was right about everything and that we'd all failed her." William's eyes filled with tears. "What did she say?" "She cried. And then she talked for 15 minutes, telling me things I should have known, should have asked about, should have understood. And then she thanked me for finally seeing her, for finally acknowledging what she'd been through." "Did it help her?" William asked. "To hear that?" "I think it did. She sounded lighter at the end of the call, hopeful. We made plans to have lunch when she returned, to continue the conversation, to try to build something better." Elizabeth paused. 10 days later, she was gone. William was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you made that call, Granny. I'm glad she heard you say those things before she died." "So am I, but I wish I hadn't waited 16 years to say them. That's the lesson, William. Don't wait. Don't let protocol or pride keep you from saying important things to people who matter, because you never know how much time you have." This conversation with William was one of the rare times Elizabeth spoke about the midnight call, but she thought about it often, especially on August 31st, each year, the anniversary of Diana's death. She thought about Diana's excitement about the future, her plans, her hope, and she thought about how close they'd come to healing their relationship, only to have time run out. The phone call hadn't saved their relationship. It had come too late for that, but it had given Diana something she'd needed for 16 years. Acknowledgement, validation, an apology. For 10 days, Diana had known that the Queen finally understood, finally admitted fault, finally saw her as a person rather than a problem. It wasn't enough, but it was something. And in the years that followed, Elizabeth held on to that. The knowledge that Diana's last impression of her wasn't just of the cold, distant Queen who'd failed to protect her. It was also of a woman who'd finally found the courage to call at midnight and say, "I was wrong. You were right. I'm sorry." In 2022, when Queen Elizabeth died at age 96, palace officials were sorting through her private papers. They found a handwritten note, undated, tucked into her personal diary from 1997. The note read, "Called Diana tonight. Told her everything I should have said 16 years ago. She forgave me. 10 days later, she was dead. Some apologies come too late to fix anything, but perhaps not too late to matter." I hope it mattered. I hope those 10 days of knowing she was right, knowing she wasn't crazy, knowing she mattered, brought her some peace. It's the only gift I could give her, and it came nearly a lifetime too late. The midnight phone call between Queen Elizabeth and Princess Diana remained one of the most significant conversations in royal history. Not because it changed anything. Diana still died. The past couldn't be undone. 16 years of suffering weren't erased by one apology, but because it showed that even the most rigid institutions are run by human beings, people who make mistakes, carry regrets, and sometimes find the courage to admit when they were wrong, even if that courage comes too late to change the outcome. Elizabeth's apology to Diana was too late, but Diana had heard it, had felt seen and validated, had died knowing that at least one person in the royal family finally understood. It was too little, too late, but it was something. And sometimes, in the final accounting of a life, something is better than the nothing that silence leaves behind.